This is the Protestant Libertarian Podcast, a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute and part of the Christians for Liberty Network. I really hope that you guys enjoy today's show. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. My guest today is Adam O'Brien. Adam is the founder and CEO of BitcoinWell, a company that is dedicated to making Bitcoin the future of commerce. We are going to be discussing Bitcoin, what is wrong with our current monetary and banking systems, and then the future of the currency. Adam, welcome to the Protestant Libertarian Podcast.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I've been looking forward to this for a long time because I know very little about Bitcoin, but from what I know about our fiat currency system, it's in bad shape. And I think Bitcoin is going to be a great alternative. Before we get into that conversation, tell us a little about yourself, your company, BitcoinWell, and the work that you do there.
Yeah, thanks, man. So first off, that's good that you know nothing, but good that you're asking questions about Bitcoin because you're right. The existing fiat monetary system is no good. But myself, I'm up in Canada. I've got a wife and 4 kids, which is pretty awesome. So we're having a blast right now. A bunch of small little kids tearing around. I found Bitcoin kind of 10 years ago. Really, honestly, thought it was a bit of a joke at first, and I started investigating and looking more into it. And when you learn about Bitcoin, I think like you're finding, you learn about economics and the way the fiat monetary system works. You learn about the history and the legacy of money. And then you learn about a little bit about encryption and how that works. But then I think most importantly, you learn about freedom and you learn about the independence, being a sovereign individual. And all those things kind of just tie into Bitcoin so well. And over the last 10 years, I've just been researching and investigating Bitcoin. And really, it's been my career to be making Bitcoin accessible, making Bitcoin easy to use. And really our mission at BitcoinWell is to enable independence. And we do that through the convenient control of Bitcoin, enabling you to have the convenient control of Bitcoin, which is cool.
Yeah, so I'm going to be asking a lot of basic questions today because, again, I'm very new to all of this. And I think the most fundamental question that a lot of people have is, what exactly is Bitcoin?
Oh man, do we have 5 hours? No, I'm just kidding. Really, my baseline answer for that is it's stored energy. If we look about what money's supposed to be, it's simply a representation of our time. And our time, of course, we can't transport into the future. And so money, historically, I'm talking like for centuries, has been a way for you to lock your efforts, lock the productivity of your time into a token. And we had like gems and fancy shells, and then we had gold, and now we have paper, which is frankly backed by nothing. And Bitcoin is a way for you to store that energy, move it into the future so that you can spend your productivity, spend your value in the future. But I think the answer you're looking for is a digital token backed by energy. If I was to sum that little rant into one sentence.
Perfect. And I want to get into the mechanics of Bitcoin here in a couple minutes. But before we do that, one of the common concerns that I've heard from people that are skeptical of Bitcoin is that we already have a monetary system. And for those of us that live in the United States, we have like the world's reserve currency. I mean, the dollar is the greatest currency ever invented, right? So why do we need an alternative currency?
Yeah, I mean, it was. And the dollar was backed by gold at one point. Obviously, it hasn't been backed by gold for about 50 years. And the US dollar has been slowly deteriorating for the last 50 years. If you think about it, you know, the money of a country is backed by the military or the promises of the government. That's all it is today. And frankly, I don't think that does a good job of storing value and storing wealth. We've got inflation numbers everyone hears and accepts blindly. Oh yeah, 2%, 3%, 5%, 8% inflation, whatever it may be. But when you look at, especially over kind of the COVID years of this millennia, we're seeing the money printing is out of control. We saw like the M0 money supply in Canada, and I think it was similar in the States, at one point quintupled over the course of a few months. Like our GDP didn't grow by 5x. How could the amount of money in our country? It just doesn't make any sense. And then, so what does that mean? Well, it means that the dollar you used to have is worth 1/5, right? Like if you used to have one of something and then you had 5 collectively, like those are all worth 1/5 of what they were. And that's not obviously how it shook out economically in Canada. We've actually pared that back to about 3 times what it used to be. But still, the money supply has tripled in the last 3 years. That is devastating to like in the long term. Short term, it's great. It's like a sudden influx of cash. But over the long term, it's catastrophic. And we've seen what money printing does in places like Venezuela and Greece and Turkey and Cyprus and lots of African countries. The list goes on and on and on. And it's catastrophic for the longevity of a country.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that real quick too. So if you could explain to my audience, I know that a lot of people in my audience are going to be familiar with the Federal Reserve in the United States and some of the monetary mechanisms that they have to expand the money supply. But for the average American, they really do believe the corporate press narrative that the higher costs that we see in the store are the result of corporate greed or something like that. So to maybe some of my more skeptical audience members or those that don't understand the structural phenomenon of American money, could you walk us through some of those problems related to the Federal Reserve and the people that are in charge of American money?
Yeah, so the Federal Reserve is in charge of the money supply of the country, and the problem is they don't have any rhyme or reason to when they are able to print that money. And so at any given time, there is more and more money coming into circulation without any value backing that money. Right? With Bitcoin, we do have Bitcoin coming into circulation every 10 minutes. Bitcoin does have more supply coming into the market every 10 minutes. The difference is there's productivity, there's energy being spent to bring that in. As we know, energy cannot be created or destroyed. Therefore, Bitcoin is simply a representation of the energy that is consumed to bring it into circulation, whereas the dollar isn't really energy. It's not really a financial unit of account because it's just made up. It's just a big shell game moving numbers on a balance sheet, which frankly, again, short term looks fine, right? If I just suddenly gave you $1 million today, that would be fine because apples still cost $1 and gas is still $3 a gallon and whatever else. But eventually that catches up, that catches on, and the economy, unfortunately right now, the economy reacts to how much money there is in the system, where it should be the case that the money in the system is a representation of the economy, of the GDP, of the total production of the world or of the economy of that country. And so right now, when the money supply triples, unless the economy also triples, unless the general production of the economy also triples, then each dollar that you have currently is going to get devalued and worth less. It's got nothing to do with corporate greed. It's got nothing to do with whatever garbage the mainstream media is displaying. It's got everything to do with how much productivity and how much monetary supply is there, because they're linked. Like, I don't care what you say. I don't care. Right. Capitalist, communist, like you can be anywhere on the political spectrum. The physics, like we are bound by gravity, regardless of the side of the political spectrum. We are also bound by the logic and the physics that GDP and money supply are inherently linked. There's no way, there's no opinions there. That's just the math. It's the science that exists there.
Right. Well, and I think with the COVID pandemic, it's even worse than previous increases in the money supply, because not only did they dramatically, like in the United States, it was something along the lines of $4 to $5 trillion that was added to the American economy, but our government also restricted production at the same time. So in terms of productivity, we were going backwards because of all of these arbitrary COVID restrictions, but then our money supply was dramatically expanding. And of course, that's going to lead to exactly what you were saying, where we see prices being twice or even 3 times as high as they were before.
But that's just it. It's not that the prices are higher. It's that the purchasing power of your dollar is lower. And that is such a common brain. It's very, very difficult to get our heads around that, because we see number go up on the price tag, right? We see cars costing more and prices at the pump are up. What we don't hear about is, hey, your savings are down. Your dollar goes less far, right? We understand this concept conceptually. We know that when we go to Mexico, things that cost $1 here are going to cost 50 peso or whatever the exchange rate looks like. And that's fine. We don't think about, but it's like things aren't more expensive in Mexico because the number on the screen is more. We know the peso just doesn't go as far as the dollar. Like, we get this stuff conceptually, but we're just either brainwashed or incapable of seeing clearly, I guess, what it means. So it is definitely a complex subject that, and frankly, we're not taught, we're not encouraged to think or talk about, which in my opinion is quite dangerous.
Yeah, and this is exactly what I wanted to get to the heart of our conversation today with. So, I became aware of Bitcoin, probably 8 or 9 years ago, but I'm not a very tech savvy person. And really, until about 4 or 5 years ago, I never gave a second thought to the currency. It was just you had you had United States dollars. You have all of your savings and all of your assets are can be denominated in dollars, and you just didn't think about anything else. But over the last 2 years, with the massive amount of government spending and the massive amount of government money printing, that has definitely caused me to rethink where I'm investing my money. But Bitcoin has always been a little bit mysterious to me because it's been difficult for me to determine from where it derives its value. So walk us through how Bitcoin works. So, you were more or less there from the inception. And I think your company, based on your website, was the first publicly traded Bitcoin company in history, right? You guys were the first.
Well, yeah. So we're a very specific type of Bitcoin company. We're a non-custodial Bitcoin company, meaning at no point in time do we hold the user's Bitcoin. And that's a key distinction, because the majority of times when you hear the mainstream media say that Bitcoin was hacked, Bitcoin's actually never been hacked. Bitcoin companies get hacked. And if your Bitcoin is sitting in a Bitcoin company that gets hacked, your Bitcoin are gone. And so we have made it very, very clear and made a very conceited effort to make sure that our business model is to deliver you the Bitcoin immediately when you purchase it. We were the first non-custodial Bitcoin company to go public in the world. Yeah.
Okay, well, so let's talk about this then. So there is energy stored on computers, and Bitcoin is a conversion of that energy. So how does that work?
Yeah, so the way that Bitcoin works is kind of four key parts to Bitcoin. There's Bitcoin, big B, the protocol, and this is kind of the monetary policy of Bitcoin, if you will. This is what governs how Bitcoin are created, how Bitcoin are spent, but most importantly, how the rules of Bitcoin exist. Bitcoin is money that is rules, not rulers. Our fiat system is rulers with no real rules for anyone except for us. So there's the protocol there. Then from the protocol, there's the miners, and the miners are in charge of enforcing the protocol. So the miners make sure that if the protocol dictates there has to be 10 new coins every minute, then that's what the miners will try to enforce. The actual, we can get into the specifics of the protocol because it's quite interesting. The monetary policy of Bitcoin and its deflationary nature is quite interesting. From the miners, we have the blockchain. The blockchain is just a database, and the blockchain's job is to take all the information that the miners are gathering. So the miners enforce the protocol. The blockchain takes all the information from the miners and makes it publicly available. So it makes it visible for you and I to look at and effectively audit the money supply of Bitcoin. You and I have zero visibility. We think we have visibility. We have zero visibility on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute, second-to-second basis of the IMF or of the Federal Reserve or whatever it may be. With Bitcoin, we can audit the supply, audit all of the protocol rules right from our houses. From this very same computer that we're talking on right now can be used to audit the monetary policy of Bitcoin through the blockchain. And then there's the nodes. And the nodes are ways for all of the tokens, basically the history of Bitcoin, that blockchain, to be distributed to other nodes to gain consensus. Because what good is all that info if one person, like the Federal Reserve, can control it? When in reality, we have nodes, and I personally have 3 or 4 different nodes. And if they're out of sync, something's wrong. If they're out of sync, I can be alerted, hey, something doesn't match here. Why not? And it basically takes the copy of the blockchain, takes the copy of all the data from the miners, and makes sure that my copy is the same as your copy, is the same as the copy of my neighbor and of the guy, keeping the Mexico analogy alive, sitting in Mexico. And so that's kind of the key instinct, maybe a bit longer and a bit more technical on what we're going after. But those 4 key pieces of Bitcoin are how they all kind of work in sync, which really is just to keep the protocol of Bitcoin, the monetary policy of Bitcoin intact and fair and democratic.
Yeah, that's a beautiful overview. Let's go ahead and start with the protocol then. So obviously it's a digital currency, so it's written in ones and zeros like all code. How does that protocol work? Like what are the rules of Bitcoin that are, I guess, embedded in the encryption of the software? If
Yeah.
that's the
So
right way to put it.
yeah, no, I think it's a great way to put it.
Okay,
So the
perfect.
protocol of Bitcoin is, in fact, so it was created by an individual or group. We don't know who or what they are, called Satoshi. And the way that the protocol works is there is a predetermined number of Bitcoin ever to exist, 21 million. And the protocol dictates that there has to be new coins brought into the market every 10 minutes. And so it also dictates that there's an algorithm effectively protecting the Bitcoin that are to come out. So the miner's job is to solve the algorithm and get the block of Bitcoin. So the protocol says, here's a bunch of blocks. They have a predetermined amount of Bitcoin inside of them. If you solve this algorithm, then you get the block of Bitcoin. And off we go. That's how new Bitcoin come into circulation. And then the best part of Bitcoin, in my opinion, is the fact that it's deflationary. So the early blocks were 50 new Bitcoin coming into circulation for however much energy was spent. And then as soon as there had been 210,000 blocks, so 50 Bitcoin had come out 210,000 times, boom. Now it's 25 Bitcoin. So you have to spend the same energy, you have the same costs, you have the same productivity, but only half the reward. So what has to happen? Like, this is how money should be working, right? You and I have deflationary time. We, generally speaking, go through life working less hard, working smarter, and getting more output, right? Our time becomes worth a lot more the more that we grow. Because we're smarter, because we're able to apply the efforts, our brains and our historical efforts, to the future. And Bitcoin kind of follows that same track with its deflationary nature. So then another 210,000 blocks passes by. So 210,000 times, there's been 25 Bitcoin brought into circulation. Boom, 12 and a half. Another 210,000, boom, 6 and a quarter, boom, 3 and 1/8. And we can see how, like, over time, eventually the same input, the same energy that took 50 Bitcoin, or that was rewarded with 50 Bitcoin, is getting fractions of a Bitcoin in a few decades. And we can really start to understand why the deflationary nature of the protocol is so important.
And so when people own Bitcoin, I guess they're owning in reality like fractions of a single Bitcoin. Is that the way that works?
Yeah, I mean, you can own a fraction of a Bitcoin. Bitcoin is divisible to 8 decimal places. So there are 100 million, what's called a Satoshi. It's short form, or sats. The same way there are 100 pennies to a dollar, there are 100 million Satoshis to a Bitcoin. You and I right now, we could send 5 sats. Like, not even a measurable monetary unit in the USA. It would be measurable probably in like Venezuela, where the money is complete garbage, but it's not measurable in the US, 5 sats. But we could send that right now back and forth, and you could own a little piece of Bitcoin, which is pretty cool. It's so yeah, you can divide Bitcoin quite good. And actually, in 2018, 2019, the mainstream narrative was actually that Bitcoin wasn't a finite unit of account because you could divide it, which is like such a hilarious thought process to me. Because if I gave you one pizza and said, hey, we're going to divide this 8 ways, and then someone said, I'll divide it 16 ways, we don't have double the pizza. You just have smaller slices. So it's like, it just goes to show how silly lots of the like FUD or the fear, uncertainty, and doubt around Bitcoin has been over the last few years.
Yeah, and I think that was a big misconception for me too. It's when Bitcoin miners do their mining, they're not creating more Bitcoin; they're dividing the Bitcoin that already exists.
Oh no, sorry, no. So they're not creating more Bitcoin. So right now, there will only ever be, the protocol dictates there can only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. However, there are only today 19 million Bitcoin in circulation. So there's a total finite supply of 21 million, but we don't have it all in circulation. 2 million roughly coins are still guarded by the protocol, by the algorithm, on a predetermined schedule to come into circulation.
Okay, and what happens when that schedule meets its like end goal or end date?
Yeah. There's actually a great video that explains this so well. It's a 15-minute video called, you know what? I'll send it to you and then hopefully put it in the show notes.
Perfect. Yeah.
And it kind of describes, a bit of the history of money, and then it foreshadows what a Bitcoin standard world could look like. And it says something so beautiful. Our world is no longer volatile because the money supply is hardly changing. And I think that is such an interesting perspective, such a forward-looking perspective, that we have not really seen what a standardized monetary policy of absolutely no volatility looks like, because our money supply is constantly changing. And so when that happens, when there's 21 million Bitcoin in an account, the protocol will still demand that we confirm transactions. So there will still be miners to confirm the transactions, but all of the money will be printed. And your wealth, your purchasing power, will be dictated by your ability to produce value for others. We all become sovereign individuals. It's like,
Right.
Read the book, The Sovereign Individual. Like this is what it's predicting, right? And your ability to buy meat is frankly, as an example, how well can you produce value for people that want to buy meat? And if you are in a corner making some little trinket that nobody wants to buy, then you won't have very much Bitcoin, because there'll be no way for you to LARP and steal it from other people. You will be subject strictly to your ability to produce, and your consumption will be directly linked to your ability to produce value. We go back to basics at that point.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. So let's talk about that mining again. So that's another thing too. And there are all kinds of narratives in the media. I remember seeing a piece a couple of months ago about how Bitcoin mining
boils the oceans,
environment. Yeah, that's actually I think that was the headline, right? And they were talking about these I guess Bitcoin, they call them farms or something like. But it was several buildings that had the hardware inside of it to mine the Bitcoin. How does that process work, like mechanically?
Yeah, I would like every single one of your listeners to listen to this. And if there's one thing you take from this podcast, from this, it's this right here. Bitcoin mining is the single greatest thing for cheap, renewable energy. And the reason for that is because Bitcoin mining is the only thing that is directly linked to energy consumption. The only cost of a Bitcoin miner is energy consumption. And so the capitalists that run the mining farms are heavily, heavily, heavily incentivized to produce cheap, clean energy from the sun. We have a giant sun that gives us so much energy, and we don't have enough batteries to store it. They just don't exist. So Bitcoin mining is a way to capture the sunlight, run the miners as the sun shines, and store that energy in a monetary form like Bitcoin. And that's as simple as it can be. Bitcoin is backed by energy, but you have to consume the energy. And so the people that consume the most will be Bitcoin miners, but they're also heavily, heavily, heavily incentivized to rely on the free energy that we already have, which is solar. So I would predict in no less than 10 years, I think, sorry, no more than 10 years, like within the next 10 years, all Bitcoin mining companies will also, and I think more importantly, be renewable energy, like R&D projects, because they'll be effectively forced, but at least heavily incentivized to mine Bitcoin with clean energy. An example here in Alberta, where I'm from, it is common practice when you are mining oil that there's a natural gas component. And our natural gas infrastructure is not very good in Alberta. Natural gas is abundant here in Alberta. And so what the oil producers actually do or did was they would flare it. If you drive through Alberta, you will see flares, stacks of flares, which is just natural gas being burnt and sent out into the atmosphere. This is common practice for energy. And now what you can do, you can take that natural gas, plug it into a generator, and mine Bitcoin. So instead of lighting the gas on fire and throwing it into the environment, you are now producing Bitcoin, right? So not only is Bitcoin able to earn extra revenue for the oil producers, which in theory should bring down the costs of what it takes to get oil, They are also way cleaner because of Bitcoin mining, because you're able to use the energy that was otherwise literally set on fire is now being used to mine Bitcoin, which is just remarkable.
Oh, I love it. I love it. So once it's mined, how can people purchase Bitcoin? Is it owned by the miners until somebody purchases an asset, or how does that transaction work?
Yeah, so the miners receive the Bitcoin into their Bitcoin wallet, and then it's the miner's choice. Do I sell this Bitcoin or do I keep this Bitcoin? Now, the miners have costs, right? They have energy costs first and foremost, but they have a little bit of infrastructure costs. They have to pay rent probably, or have to buy land, have to pay some people to make sure and maintain the farms or whatever. So at least a little bit of Bitcoin from those blocks has to get sold into the market. And that's where we are today, 13, 14 years later after Bitcoin was conceptualized and started working. We've got a pretty good, open supply of Bitcoin. It's estimated there's about 13 or 14 million of the 19 million total Bitcoin in circulation, and that just trades hands. And so companies like ours at Bitcoin Well, we help people buy Bitcoin in the fastest and safest way possible. In Canada, that's done through a system called Interac eTransfer, and in the US, it's through a platform, a payment rail called ACH. It's basically just connect your bank account, enter your Bitcoin address, and receive Bitcoin. It's very, very, very simple.
Yeah, that's really cool. And the blockchain is the mechanism that allows Bitcoin to be transferred from one owner to another. And that is also what keeps it safe as well, right?
Yeah, so the blockchain really is just a database. And so the blockchain doesn't actually do anything other than store value. What really happens is the Bitcoin protocol says, hey, this is a Bitcoin address, just like your email protocol. Like we all use email every single day. We all think Gmail or Google owns email or Yahoo, or maybe not Yahoo anymore, but you kind of get my drift. Right. But really what's happening is Google has given you a really easy way to interact with the SMTP, which is the email protocol. And that email protocol says an email address has to look like this. If you want to send an email, you have to do these certain steps. And Google just makes it a compose button in the top left-hand corner. So it's very simple. But the platform, the software behind that is quite complex, and Google has made that very easy for us to do. And so the Bitcoin protocol says the same thing. There are wallets, Bitcoin wallets, that allow you to just simply press receive to receive Bitcoin, press send to send Bitcoin. That's not actually the blockchain. That transaction is recorded on the blockchain, but it's all done through the Bitcoin protocol.
Yeah, and it keeps all of those transactions safe to ensure that you as an individual aren't going to have your Bitcoin hacked or manipulated in any way.
Bingo. And so like I said, kind of back to consensus, like Bitcoin has never been hacked, period. There has never, ever, ever been a hack on Bitcoin because the protocol is so simple and because the protocol is so distributed, there's no single choke point. This is contrary to Bitcoin companies. This is contrary to banks and other financial services. But the actual Bitcoin, like money on the Bitcoin protocol, is only exposed to whoever owns those Bitcoin. So if I own Bitcoin, for example, and then I lose my private key, I lose my password, and then I send that Bitcoin somewhere else, there's no way to undo that. And I think lots of people get hung up on the finality of Bitcoin. And that's because we've lived in a Control-Z fiat economy for so long. When you think about it logically, you don't want the bank teller at Bank of America to be able to undo your transactions, because that means that the opposite can actually happen. And that's happened to me before. I've had tens of thousands of dollars undone at the bank's decision, which is catastrophic. When money is fake, it moves hands so liberally without much thought. We get lazy, we get silly, and we get complacent, we get stupid. And I don't think we develop the mental fortitude and the responsibility of owning our own wealth. And Bitcoin gives us the opportunity to own our own wealth, which is good because it means nobody has the ability to control you otherwise. You can't quite see it, but I've got the executive order of the president from 1933 to confiscate all the gold hanging in my office 90 years ago, a little more than 90 years ago now. And it's a stark reminder that that's only possible in a in a custodial or in a control Z world, if you own and control your Bitcoin, nobody can take it. Probably no one even knows you have it. Good luck taking it from you, right? Over my dead body. And sure, with violence and force, somebody could come and take my Bitcoin, but it will ultimately be at my decision. And I think that's different from all of our registered accounts, your 401k, the money in your Chase checking account or savings account, the money on the stock market, your gold ETF, your Bitcoin ETF. All of that is subject to government manipulation. The Bitcoin that you hold, even your property, the land that you own, the house that you live in, is subject to government manipulation. But your Bitcoin, owned and controlled by you, is the only asset on planet Earth where you have sole control. You're truly a sovereign individual at that point, which is like how inspiring is that we have a financial tool to be a sovereign individual is pretty insane.
So when these Bitcoin companies get hacked, essentially what the hackers are doing is just taking the Bitcoin. They're not manipulating it or manufacturing new because they can. Okay, yeah,
exactly. So like Coinbase is an example. Coinbase is a giant honeypot for hackers. If you have your Bitcoin and they're just yours, let's say you've amassed $100,000 of wealth and you're going to put it into Bitcoin. You have 3 Bitcoin now. Let's say, phenomenal, congratulations. Who does a hacker want to hack? You, who has 3 Bitcoin, or Coinbase, who publicly has thousands of Bitcoin, right? It's the same. Yeah. Well, you're probably a little bit easier to hack, I suppose. Coinbase is going to have a little bit more controls and governance in place. But at the end of the day, the honeypot is massive. And so it's not Bitcoin's fault that Coinbase has all those coins for their customers. It's Coinbase's fault for getting hacked if they were to get hacked. I'm not suggesting they are or will or whatever, but that's how it works. In the case of FTX, which is a popular crypto exchange that just went broke, I'm sure you've heard of it, or just went defrauded everyone, basically. Massive scam. That was only possible because people left their coins with the exchange. They didn't have true self-custody of those Bitcoin, which is what was so problematic.
Yeah. So that is really great. And I think, again, from my own perspective, I've always been brought up to believe that if you work really hard and you save all of your money, then you can set yourself up for the future. But again, government inflationary program just completely hollows out all of your fiat savings. Like, it loses its value over time. So you might have $100,000 in 2020, but in 2030, there's no guarantee you're not going to be able to buy the same amount of goods, as you said before, with that $100,000 as you would.
It's like you'll still have $100,000. But it's not going to buy you, a really nice Mercedes. It's going to buy you like maybe a Toyota Corolla, right? And that's the main problem. I was having this conversation in like 2015 or 16 with one of my friends who I respect a ton. He's like, "Well, my dollars will always be there." It's like, sure, they'll just be worthless.
Yeah.
Like, look at the people in Greece and Cyprus and Turkey and Venezuela, and it's like, it's sad, man. It's really, really sad, the amount of inflation. And inflation is a slow killer because it's just ever so slightly, and your purchasing power just erodes.
And so in a lot of ways, I guess Bitcoin is a much more reliable asset than fiat because it's not going to lose its value over time.
Yeah, Bitcoin is a place for long-term wealth storage. I don't even think Bitcoin is an investment. I think Bitcoin is a savings tool. Bitcoin is our only shot at actually achieving true savings. Everything else is an investment. And funny enough, when you start measuring your investments in Bitcoin, the investment often loses. Bitcoin is such a strong savings tool that everything else you own against Bitcoin goes down. This includes gold and property and penny stocks and all the rest of it. On a long enough time frame, Bitcoin is the true savings tool. And we ought to be measuring our wealth and our investments in Bitcoin, in my opinion.
Yeah. So I know you've kind of touched on this before, but this is another major concern of some of the people that I've talked to. And one of the things that I've worked through, I believe now I'm starting to see how all of this would work. Bitcoin avoids a lot of the inflationary problems that are caused by like fractional reserve banking and Fed policy because it's limited in quantity, right? Like there'll never be more than 21 million. And that's the limit.
Yeah.
So they can't just
scarcity.
print. Yeah. Yeah.
Scarcity is the key, right? And scarcity in the fact that nobody can replicate. Like with fractional banking, so there's fractional reserve banking practices, which allow you to deposit a dollar, me to borrow 97 cents of that dollar, and then deposit that 97 cents, and a third party to borrow 94 and a half cents against that 97. Now your dollar is the equivalent of like 280, and that runs all the way down the line until there's no more cents. It's like, I think $1 can be equated to like $9 or $10 in circulation. Like it's absolutely staggering, over and above the money printing. Like it's like it is mind-blowing how much money is actually in circulation outside of the control of anyone except for the feds, pretty much. And so Bitcoin being a hard asset that cannot be duplicated in the real world, you just can't fractionally lend against it. You can lend paper Bitcoin, right? If you give me one Bitcoin, now I have custody, I can give you a fake balance. But if I spend it and you go to withdraw that Bitcoin and I don't have it, it's not coming out. Like you just can't. It's right. Physics and math and science. It's like you want to fly, but you don't have wings. So good luck, pal, right? It just doesn't work. And again, it just, when we have this fiat standard, we have this ability to fractionally reserve land, we have this ability to print more at will, we develop a fiat economy, which is what lots of the problems of today are caused by. It's very, very short-term thinking without any regard for the long-term consequence. This is a common government problem, in my opinion. And then Bitcoin completely eradicates all of those problems by forcing you into long-term mindsets.
So what's the difference between Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies? Because it seems like there's a lot of options out there, but Bitcoin seems to be the most reliable and the most popular. What separates it or distinguishes it from the other alternatives on the crypto market?
The majority is the centralization, or in Bitcoin's case, the decentralization of Bitcoin's code compared to the centralization of the majority. When I say majority, I mean about 99.9% of other cryptocurrencies. And what that centralization, it all comes back to the scarcity or lack thereof in crypto's sake. Bitcoin is truly scarce because in order for me to print more, I need 51% of the entire Bitcoin community to agree to print more. If I want to print more ETH, I need to go pretty much just tell Vitalik that I want more ETH, grease his palms a little bit, and he can flip the switch. It is so centralized. That's ETH or Ethereum. Ripple is the same thing. Solana, Avalanche, all these other garbage tokens are the same way. They are centralized to the founder and to the group that runs them. I mean, Ethereum has an Ethereum Foundation, for goodness sake. Like it is a proper centralized organization that has a token that basically acts as a gift card to run on their platform. It's just not money. And that's fine, right? It doesn't have to be money, but don't pretend that it is. It's a flyer of a penny stock rather than buying a hard asset. When I got into this game in 2013, blockchain, Bitcoin, crypto, they were all kind of used synonymously. It all meant the same thing at that time. And then now, as you know, as the industry hardens and as things kind of progress a little bit, we can see clearly that blockchain is different from Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is different from crypto. And the chasm between crypto and Bitcoin is growing so much. Rightfully so, because Bitcoin is sound money and crypto is centralized projects, which 95% won't even amass to anything.
All right, that all makes a lot of sense, and you've cleared up a lot of questions that I've had about Bitcoin. We got to go, I guess, more to the dark side of this conversation now. There have been a lot of American politicians in particular that are very upset about Bitcoin because it's beyond government regulation, at least I guess it is at this point, and because they cannot tax it and inflate it as effectively as they can with fiat currency. So what does the regulatory framework for Bitcoin look like in the future? Is it going to be immune from the whims of American Congress, or is there a chance that the government might be able to step in and regulate who can and can't have it and all of those things that come along with that?
So, like, there is no way for a government to prevent you from owning Bitcoin. They can push a law that says you shouldn't buy Bitcoin, but there's no way for them to physically prevent you from buying Bitcoin. And that's exactly what makes them so scared. I think that the regulatory framework seems pretty favorable for Bitcoin right now. Bitcoin is very clearly not a security. It's very clearly a unit of account backed by energy. Where things get a little scary is the environmental FUD around like fear, uncertainty, and doubt around Bitcoin, the way that the mainstream media portrays Bitcoin that boils the oceans. And as we get, like, I'm not sure what it's like in the States, but like we can't even have a bag here in Canada to like save the earth. And like it's pretty garbage here. And so like as we get more and more laws that are outside of logic, in all in an effort to like save the earth, like I think we're months away from a climate lockdown at this point in Canada, which is like petrifying in and of itself. And so that is one of the downfalls to our society. There could be regulations that comes out that bans Bitcoin because it's so bad for the environment. I'm obviously being facetious, but nothing will prevent you from owning Bitcoin. You've got a Bitcoin wallet that is yours. It's only in your control, and you can choose to do whatever you like with that Bitcoin. And so again, it goes back to guns and violence. The government can come to your door and say, "Don't you dare buy Bitcoin," and you can, and that's okay. And most importantly, you can pack up and go. Right? If you've got Bitcoin that you own and control, you can just leave. Go to a country, go to a jurisdiction that is favorable, that understands the value of Bitcoin, that understands how important being a sovereign individual is. Leave the communist regime that is preventing you from owning and controlling your money. And that's what Bitcoin gives you the ability to do.
So some American politicians that are involved in the monetary world have been floating the idea of a central bank digital currency, which I think that they're in a lot of ways riding the current popularity of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies right now. And I think they're trying to market it that way. You're taking your fiat dollars and you're just going to put it in a digital wallet and you'll be able to use it as if it was completely digital currency. How are CBDCs different than Bitcoin? And what are some of the problems that could result from having a central bank digital currency?
So the central bank kind of already has a digital currency, because if you tallied up all the dollars in circulation digitally, they wouldn't actually equal the amount of paper money. Like money doesn't actually get printed.
Yeah, they don't print the same anymore.
It's just ones and zeros in somebody's computer. So they already kind of have a central bank digital currency. What's important is not how it's stored. Great. It's in my CBDC wallet, and I can open I don't have to open the Bank of America app. I can open the Fed's CBDC app. At the end of the day, it gives the Feds, frankly, in my opinion, more control without that extra layer of banking in between. And there's threats. There's big threats there. We've heard the concept of a 15-minute city. And what if your CBDC, like this is really technically possible. Your CBDC may not be valid outside your 15-minute city. Your CBDC is only valid to buy 1 kg of steak this month, only 100 gallons of petrol a month. You can only consume so much media per month. We can see restrict all in the name of saving something, I'm sure, but we can see how the restrictions are going to and are able to be implemented when it is centrally controlled. The key difference between a CBDC, centrally controlled, and Bitcoin, which is decentrally controlled or controlled by the protocol, is it again would be impossible to eliminate me from spending my Bitcoin or prevent me from my Bitcoin because of how the protocol is written. It's just there's no opportunity for a government to step in and say yes or no. With the CBDC, they can just build it into the code. CBDC is no different than Ethereum in that point, where whoever owns the protocol owns the power to display where it can and cannot be spent. In the case of Bitcoin, nobody owns the protocol. It's just distributed publicly for us all to use, contribute, and agree or disagree with as we so please. So I think the main difference there is just who controls it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and in Canada, I know in the wake of the COVID-19 lockdowns and all of the government of Canada was even more oppressive than the government of the United
It was
States.
insane, dude. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't even imagine living up there during that time. And I know that there were people when they had the trucker protest about the vaccines that the Canadian government stepped in and actually shut down their access to their bank accounts. Maybe you
Yeah.
should talk about that for a minute, because I think that does tie into the CBDC issue, because I don't think it's just theoretical or a conspiracy theory that under a CBDC system they would implement some sort of social credit score, like you were saying, just shut us off from all of our money if we needed it.
Completely. I mean, Bitcoin shone in that. It was so actually, there's a book by a guy called BJ Novak. I think he's a trucker, and he kind of like he was the one that kind of organized and front ran that protest. You should definitely check out his book. It's solid. And he, I think there was like a significant, I want to say $1 million, but that sounds too high. But anyways, a significant amount of money was donated to the protest in Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin was untouchable. There was some people that sent the Bitcoin to a government-controlled institution, and that Bitcoin, once it left their custody, was gone. But the Bitcoin that was held and remained in the control of the individual remained untouchable by the government. And I think that's so important. Like, we saw people donating to a legal protest, peaceful protest that our prime minister didn't like. And on Sunday, he made the decision to freeze bank accounts. And on Monday, it was deemed that he wasn't able to do that. He cited some law that gave him the ability, some state of emergency, but it actually was deemed inconstitutional. And he had to reverse that. But the fact that he did it before it was legal, that's the problem. People are like, yeah, well, it was reversed, so who cares? The fact that they could, the fact that there was a possibility that he had the power before he was given permission to do that. And that just like a CBDC just expedites that process.
Yeah, well, I know you definitely have me sold on Bitcoin, but I am, like a lot of people, I'm very interested in it, but I don't know where to get started. So if you're looking to invest in Bitcoin or acquire Bitcoin, what are the recommended steps to do that? How do you get into the Bitcoin game?
Man, this is the best question, because most people jump straight into how do I buy? But how do I get started is such a better question. So we're partnered with a group called Looking Glass Education. And they actually will go through, they have tons of content that will get you fired up about why Bitcoin exists. And then they have the tactical, here's how to do it, which is fantastic. We also have developed a course called the Bitcoin Academy. If you go to bitcoinwell.com/academy, you'll be able to take that. It's a 6-module course. It's all free. And you can learn about Bitcoin, learn about how to get started. From there, on our website, bitcoinwell.com/blog, there are self-guided tutorials on how to set up a Bitcoin wallet on your phone. And then, of course, you go to bitcoinwell.com/app, you sign up with just an email and password, and then you can buy Bitcoin directly from us. So there is a journey. I call it the Bitcoin journey, and it never stops. I personally am continuing on my Bitcoin journey. I'm learning new stuff about Bitcoin every single day. I've been doing this for over 10 years. Bitcoin never stops teaching you and learning how to do it. If you learned how to set up an email address, if you learned how to set up a YouTube account, if you learned how to set up a website, you can learn how to use Bitcoin. It is very, very possible. And so I would recommend Looking Glass Education, take the Bitcoin Academy. The Looking Glass also offers a function where I believe it's $169. I'll give you a 1-hour consult, sit down with you, help you set up a Bitcoin wallet, and help you understand everything there is to know about that wallet.
Well, Adam O'Brien, this has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you coming on today and explaining everything. How can people connect with you and your company?
Hit me up on Twitter at Adam O'Brien _ on Twitter. You can go to bitcoinwell.com. I really do encourage you to sign up, at least for the newsletter at bitcoinwell.com. We try to send out some relevant information here and there. And I cannot stress enough how important it is to buy Bitcoin, hold it in self-custody, and truly be sovereign. And that's a journey to get there. And I understand that. So definitely go to bitcoinwell.com, sign up for our newsletter. reach out to me, adam@bitcoinwell.com or at @AdamO'Brien_ on Twitter. I'm more active on Twitter than I am in my email. So definitely get me on Twitter there. And this has been a great conversation, man. Awesome questions. It's so awesome. Bitcoin obviously inherently adopts lots of libertarian policies and the monetary policy in of itself. It's very individual freedom focused. And it's so awesome talking to individuals that understand the importance of sovereignty and freedom, but don't yet know about Bitcoin. And because Bitcoin just makes so much sense to them. And it's so awesome to see that be the case. It's very, very cool. And I commend you for starting your Bitcoin journey.
Yeah, well, hey, I mean, I really appreciate this. This was absolutely incredible. I'm going to put links to all of this stuff in the show notes. So if any listeners want to follow up on any of this stuff, which I highly recommend you do, you'll be able to find those in the show notes. Adam, thank you so much for coming on today.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, mate. Take care.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at theprotestantlibertarian@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter. You can follow me at the handle @ProLibertyPod. Again, that is @ProLibertyPod. And you can also visit me at theprotestantlibertarianpodcast.com. At theprotestantlibertarianpodcast.com, you can also support the Christians for Liberty Network and the Libertarian Christian Institute. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode, and we will see you next Tuesday.